Now, the Prime Minister had to defend the government's handling of the NHS yesterday after the unprecedented call in England for a month's worth of non-urgent operations and appointments to be postponed. As stories of patients enduring long waits in ambulances and on trolleys in A&E mount, is it time to look at a radically different way of running our health service? Here's Kate Andrews from the Institute of Economic Affairs with her soapbox.
All non-urgent operations and outpatient appointments in England are put on hold because of mounting pressure on the NHS.
I want to apologise for the fact that we have had, regrettably, to postpone a number of operations.
I know it's frustrating, I know it's disappointing for people, and I apologise.
The philosophy of the National Health Service is that good healthcare should be accessible to all, regardless of wealth. But it's not available this month. 50,000 appointments have been cut from the schedule, or more accurately put, 50,000 patients, many of whom are waiting in pain, are being forced to wait even longer for their hip replacements and their knee surgeries. All because the NHS is ill-equipped to deal with the winter flu. If this isn't the definition of system failure, what is? We all know deep down that hard truths are being buried to protect this sacred cow. But if doctors are now speaking out about the third world conditions in the NHS, isn't it time that politicians and commentators followed suit? The NHS ranks in the bottom third of international comparisons for health system performance. It grades far below the social health insurance systems of Europe and other systems further abroad, which outperform the UK on crucial aspects of healthcare, like A&E waiting times and cancer treatments. If the UK were to consider a different approach to healthcare, there would be no need to compromise on the core philosophy that care should be available for all. Contrary to popular belief, most of the developed world offers universal access to healthcare. From Switzerland to Hong Kong, these systems provide coverage for everyone, and they aren't toppled over by flu outbreaks. No one outside the UK envies the NHS. Many people, including the Health Secretary this week, cite the Commonwealth Fund study, a rare report that ranks the NHS best overall, to suggest that they do. But when you break it down and look at the health outcome section of the study, the NHS plummets from the top of the chart to 10th out of 11. The Guardian summed the study up perfectly when the 2014 version was released, noting that the only serious black mark against the NHS was its poor record on keeping people alive. You can keep the 3 letters if you wish, but it's time for a radical change to create a better, patient-centric system.
And Kate Andrews joins us now. Welcome to the Daily Politics. You set out some of the problems. What about the solution in your mind? What should it be?
Well, I think it's a combination. Funding is something that has to be talked about, but that's a secondary issue for me. It was tweeted at me an article over the weekend from 2000, 18 years ago now, that was highlighting all the same problems with the NHS. It was reported in the Telegraph that we didn't have enough beds, that the winter crisis was coming, that we were having to import people from overseas in order to take up vacancies in the NHS. We're still dealing with this 18 years later. So for me, this highlights 2 really major things. First is that on the left, everyone says we need more money. Well, that might be part of the solution, but
not just on the left either.
No, that's true. A lot of people do. But in particular, a lot of people are saying that this government has underfunded the NHS. And I reject that, because if you look at countries like Australia and Israel, they are actually putting less money into their healthcare systems and getting better patient outcomes. On the other side, on the right, often you have a lot of people saying, well, we have too many immigrants coming into this country using up resources. But like it was in 2000, like it is now, you're more likely to be treated by an immigrant than you are really to have them holding up the queue. So for me, it's about looking elsewhere, looking to Europe, looking to other systems that are getting this right. Not the US, but other systems that are fit for 2018.
So a social insurance scheme where people pay into some sort of health insurance at various different levels, as they do in Germany, and then you get the health service at different levels.
I think that would be a great system to look at, but it's not just that people are paying out of their own pockets into these insurance schemes. The government ensures that everyone has access to them. So they'll top you up, or they'll give you credit to make sure that you can afford it, so no one's left out.
Right. This is, though, changing the core fundamental principle at the heart of the health service in this country, which is that it is free at the point of delivery. Are you prepared in Labour to reconsider that principle?
Absolutely not. I mean, the NHS will be celebrating its 70th birthday this year, and we know that there is full support amongst the British public for the NHS. If you ask in any popularity poll what are the services they would most want to see their money spent on, they put NHS first. They understand that any of us can be hit by a very serious illness, and that when the NHS is given the proper resources, it has standards that are second to none in the world.
Right, so how much money are you prepared to put into it?
Value for money, reputation as well. We said very, very clearly in our manifesto for the election this year that we would put an additional 37 billion over the next 5 years in, because we need that level of funding. We need to ensure that we can deliver. And if I may just make the point about 2000, we did an enormous amount between 97 and 2010 to bring down waiting lists, to fund the NHS a lot better. And it has been in the last 7 years that the squeeze on funding has gone back the other direction.
All right, let's talk about the fact that actually it's politically still unpalatable to talk about getting rid or abandoning that core principle where it is free at the point of delivery. So your scheme will never even get off the ground.
I do not want to abandon that core principle. This is what's so crucial about this argument, is that the UK came up with the principle of universal access free at the point of use. No one's abandoning that. Every other developed country in the world looked at that principle apart from the United States and said that's a great principle, but they implement it in a terrible and inefficient way. And that's why the NHS has not been replicated anywhere else in the world. They have different systems that uphold that principle. So we're not talking about abandoning it. I completely appreciate that point. But my question to you would be, if you do want to put more money into the NHS, and I'm very open-minded to that, where is it coming from? You can't increase the deficit, because that falls on my generation. That means that people like me have to pay that back down the road. What are we going to cut, or what are we going to reprioritise to put more money into the NHS?
We've been very clear about that. We funded everything we said we'd do in our manifesto. And what we're talking about is making sure that
that manifesto borrowed a lot of money.
There were gaping holes in the manifesto.
No, we have funded all the promises that we've made. And I'll tell you very clearly, things like cutting corporation tax have really put holes in this government's budget. And the fact of the matter is, people want to see the NHS funded. So we said very clearly we would not get rid of that 50% tax rate for the top taxpayers. We've said very clearly we would not impose further tax burdens on the rest of the population. We're very clear that we can fund it from changes that we would make in the top taxation and in corporations.
And there is a crisis in the NHS that goes beyond previous crises. And Nia makes the point that satisfaction in the public with the NHS was high when Labour led office, and certainly for a few years into the coalition. Now, on your watch, you are presiding over a crisis in which non-urgent operations have been cancelled for a month. Theresa May says the NHS is better prepared because they've cancelled those operations ahead of time. But there has never been a crisis at the levels that we are experiencing now in recent years, and that is on a Conservative government's watch.
I completely disagree with you. I think what Kate said about the year 2000, I remember it.
No, but let's talk about the crisis now,
you made an assertion about this being an unprecedented crisis.
Well, I can give you the quotes.
And I am rejecting that, because ever since I've been in politics, and before that, the NHS has always had, been a centre of the political debate, and people have said there's a big problem.
All right, well, let's have a look at
there are ongoing problems with funding. And I think that's a much more mature, forgive me, way of looking at it than simply saying this is the worst crisis we've ever had.
I'm not saying it.
The government is everything to blame.
NHS England's Professor Keith Willett has said the pressures were the worst he had seen since the 1990s. Professor Suzanne Mason of the Royal College of Emergency Medicine has warned patient safety is now being compromised. And then we have anecdotal evidence which goes beyond previous winters in recent times, talking about the times people are waiting in corridors, that they're waiting on trolleys, that they're not even been taken out of ambulances. And that Theresa May has apologised. Now, she wouldn't have apologised if she didn't think it was a crisis.
I think we have a problem. We have a problem because we've got lots of demand and we have smaller resources. We have, there's a pressure on resources. Of course we know that. We're running a deficit.
So why don't you put more money into it?
As we have done for 17 years. And we've got to try and balance the books and stabilise the economy. Now, I think the Labour route would be one of complete ruin and economic catastrophe. That's not going to help the NHS. If you get Marxists running the economy, you're not going to get a better NHS. Similarly, what Kate was saying about insurance and other models, that's interesting. I mean, that's part of the debate. I was in a government with people like Nick Clegg and others who had written books about this. They wrote the Orange Book 12 years ago, suggesting that, you know, we need to look at bits of insurance.
And it's not so frightening,
And that's,
is
and
it?
that's
Yeah.
you know, I'm totally committed, as Nia is, to an NHS which is free at the point of delivery. But I'm also open-minded enough to look at other countries.
Right, so you would
and
look
see-
at
I would
the
them. We
ideas
should
of
have
social
debate.
insurance.
The idea that we have a monopoly and a complete exclusive hold on wisdom on the NHS and health in Britain, I think is a really arrogant idea.
All right, Sarah Wollaston, your Conservative colleague who chairs the Health Select Committee, suggested people over 40 should pay more tax to fund the NHS. Is that something you would consider?
No, I don't see why people over 40 should necessarily be the
People who
ones
could
who
afford, perhaps not just people over 40, but people over 40 who could afford it.
As Sarah will know, there are lots of people over 40 who aren't earning lots of money. It's not as if there's a kind of scale in which older people necessarily earn lots more than younger people. I mean, there are rich 35-year-olds, just as there are poor 45-year-olds.
Fine. So you reject that suggestion. You talk to politicians all the time about this off the camera. Is there more support for what you're suggesting along the lines of Kwasi Kwarteng than perhaps is always demonstrated publicly?
I'm so thrilled to hear Kwasi say that publicly that he would be interested in just looking at other systems.
I've always been interested in that.
And I can't tell you how much I appreciate that because, no, it's true. Unfortunately, most politicians across the political spectrum are burying their heads in the sand on this one, just saying that the NHS is the envy of the world. No one outside of the UK thinks that the NHS is the envy of the world. So I appreciate it so much.
That people do think the NHS is
Not in the
envy of
developed world,
I
they don't.
think the problem is, I mean, I'm in between both of you. I mean, I think it's very easy to run down the NHS. I think the NHS has had huge successes. But what I am open to, as I write books, I've edited books, I'm interested in the battle of ideas, the debate. I think that's important.
great.
We're going to have to leave it there, but thank you.
Thank you.
2018 will be a hectic year. It's been fairly hectic the last few